Good morning, everyone. My name is Reverend West McNeill, and I'm the Executive Director of the Labor Religion Coalition of New York State. And it's really an honor to be standing here this morning alongside our allies in labor, speaking about the critical need to fully fund our public higher education institutions in this state this year. Today, we're releasing a letter signed by 131 religious and faith leaders representing every tradition and every part of our state, calling for full funding for SUNY and CUNY in this year's budget. As the letter states, quote, "Our religious traditions call us to advocate for justice, equity, and the well-being of our communities. A vibrant SUNY and CUNY system that makes debt-free higher education accessible to all, meets the academic, social, and emotional needs of students, and treats workers with dignity and respect is a necessary ingredient for a just and healthy New York." We know that more than a decade of austerity and disinvestment has taken a toll on our SUNY and CUNY campuses and teaching hospitals. This budget this year is not just about what is needed this year. It's about restoring and repairing our state's commitment to public education and public health. It's about making a down payment on funding a future where our public colleges, the people's colleges, are truly world-class and accessible to everyone, no matter their wealth or their connections. One of the lessons that we have to take from this experience of the pandemic is how essential it is to invest in our public goods, in our community resources, and public higher education is a critical part of that. Over 130 religious and faith leaders across our state joined this call because we know that the health of our institutions of public higher education is critical to the health of our communities. We are asking Governor Hochul, Speaker Hasty, and Majority Leader Stuart Cousins to reject the austerity of years past and fund the thriving, accessible SUNY and CUNY that New Yorkers deserve. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Reverend Roxanne Jones-Booth, who is joining us this morning from Riverview Missionary Baptist Church in Coeymans.
I am Roxanne Jones-Booth, co-pastor of the Riverview Missionary Baptist Church in Coeymans, New York, and an adjunct professor at UAlbany. As a faith leader and a public education educator, I am compelled to stand today to demand that New York State fully fund SUNY and CUNY institutions. I stand recognizing that if the budget is passed without allocating over $500 million in additional funding to SUNY and CUNY campuses and our public teaching hospitals in the 2022-2023 state budget, this state will fail to live up to its purpose to foster with its students a single-minded purpose, which is that each student author their own success doing the things that matter. SUNY and CUNY institutions have a history of being affordable and accessible to all. And for generations, CUNY and SUNY have opened doors of opportunities to New Yorkers from all backgrounds and have helped develop great leaders and innovators in education, government, community development, religion, the arts, business, and more. Affordable tuitions and accessible higher education for all is the hallmark of establishing a fair and a just society. If New York State fails to fully fund SUNY and CUNY institutions, it will be detrimental to the well-being of our state and ultimately our nation. Public education is one of the most important investments we can make in building a more just and equitable society. But years of disinvestment has made higher education in our state more expensive and harder to access for poor and low-income families and has stressed the public colleges, and universities that our communities depend on. We must change course and fully fund SUNY and CUNY this year. Now, as a Baptist preacher, I've got to add the scripture. Scripture tells us in Amos chapter 2, verse 7, they trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground and deny justice to the oppressed. This investment is trampling on the heads of the poor, making it more difficult for the working class to access higher education. This investment is trampling on the heads of the low-income families, crippling opportunities for higher education to secure better-paying jobs. This investment is trampling on the heads of the poor, working poor, struggling to pay rising tuition. We demand that the state legislature change course, stop trampling on the heads of the poor, change course, restore opportunities to all New Yorkers to have access to higher education, change course, and fully fund SUNY and CUNY this year. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over now to James Davis, the president of PSC CUNY.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm honored to join my voice this morning to those who are here today supporting a transformative investment in public higher education in New York. For those of us who represent the workers at SUNY and CUNY, it means a lot that more than 130 faith leaders have joined the call for a renewed commitment to these two amazing systems. There's clearly a recognition that public higher education is a matter of social justice, matter of racial justice, and it's an obligation that cannot be ignored as we seek to recover from the pandemic. What does a just recovery from the pandemic look like in New York? It looks like an investment in our public institutions, including and especially our public universities. 67,000 people have died from COVID in New York State, 40,000 of them in New York City alone. The communities that the City University of New York serves have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. An investment in CUNY is an investment in those communities. An investment in public higher education all across New York State is an investment in a just recovery for the working class and poor New Yorkers who need it the most. They need access to a high-quality SUNY and CUNY college education, not only to fulfill their individual goals and ambitions, but also so their families can prosper and their communities can flourish. Prior to the pandemic, CUNY students, faculty, and staff have been subject to more than a decade of cuts to state funding. CUNY needs thousands of new full-time faculty and staff in order to be made whole, including academic advisors and mental health counselors. We need part-time employees to have better wages and a path to more secure employment. And our facilities need major improvements in order to be safe and welcoming for our students. The governor's executive budget sent an important signal that public higher education is critically important. The Senate and Assembly have just amplified that signal and proposed an even more robust investment. So we're here to say that the path to New York's recovery from the pandemic goes straight through SUNY and CUNY, and the path beyond austerity for working class New Yorkers leads to stability and hope and prosperity for the entire state of New York.
My name is the Reverend Peter Cook. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Council of Churches. We represent 7,500 congregations in every part of the state, rural, suburban, and urban. We've been around since the late 19th century, and as parishes, we have strongly supported the role of government to invest in our communities, particularly in higher education. We are responsible, so many of our churches, for many of our public institutions, but we know that these institutions cannot survive on charity alone, and this is why we have so strongly advocated over the years for public investment in our communities. We might ascribe to the principles of the New Deal under Franklin Roosevelt, who really encouraged us to make public investment as a way to revitalize our economy. And we are faced with a similar challenge today. We encourage our congregations to reach out to their communities and to advocate for the health of their public institutions, because we know that the very survival of the people who sit in our pews and in our community depends on those government investments. We are shocked and concerned that we have moved away from this Rooseveltian Keynesian approach to economic development to a trickle-down kind of approach, where we think that we'll revitalize our communities by giving a bunch of tax breaks to people at the top in hope that it trickles down. This theory has been discredited, but unfortunately it shapes so much of how we do public policy in Albany. And so I'm here today to say that we need to reject this trickle-down approach and start investing in the bottom up. And one of the key ways in which we can do that is to invest in our higher education institutions, in faculty salaries, in improving facilities, in upholding our hospitals, many which are serving those who are uninsured, and making that kind of a public investment which helps our communities to truly thrive. So please, let's fully fund the money, fully fund the budgets for CUNY and SUNY with this $500 million allocation.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll invite up Dr. Fred Kowal, the president of UUP.
Thank you, Reverend McNeill, and it is truly an honor to be standing here with so many representatives of faith communities, and in turn, you are here representing so many hundreds more. I believe it is imperative, you started me thinking this way, that I should start with something from Isaiah. Stop doing wrong, learn to do right, seek justice, encourage the oppressed. For far too long, as so many others have already stated, New York State has been burdened by austerity budgets and a philosophy of austerity when it comes to our public goods. This is not justice. And in fact, at the same time, what it shows is a lack of morality, the principles that are necessary to move us to a just and equitable society, indeed, I would say a more humane society. Just over the past 15 years, if the SUNY budget had simply been held flat and accounted for inflation, the State University of New York system would have $7 billion more at its disposal. That would mean the ability of so many more students to fulfill their dreams, and also to help those students who were in the system in these years who could not complete their education because of the fact that resources were not available for full-time faculty and staff, or for those counselors and tutors that are so crucial for the success of students. When one looks at where our public higher education systems are, we can see very clearly about how important the economic role that these institutions play. And far too often, what we think about is, well, there's some encouragement of business activity. There's growth in the economy. Well, this is all true. But in terms of the SUNY campuses that UUP represents, and we have roughly 42,000 members when you include retirees at 29 campuses, when one examines where our campuses are, in fact, 15, and when you include the 2 SUNY hospitals, and one in Syracuse, one in downstate, 17 of these campuses are located in counties where the poverty rates are higher than the New York State average. These SUNY campuses are located in some of the most depressed areas of upstate New York. And in fact, since the Great Recession, there has been almost no recovery in upstate New York's economies, whether it is in the big cities of Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, or it's been in small towns, like where I live in Cobleskill, New York, where the only economic development that's occurred in the 30 years that I've been there, and I will not call it economic development, is the opening of a new Walmart. This is not economic development. These communities are so dependent on the injection of the funds that come with the SUNY institution. But more than that, there is the support of the arts, of theater, of sports in these communities. Literally, these campuses are the lifeblood of upstate communities, and by disinvesting in them, it exacerbates the financial difficulties that started with the Great Recession and have not ended. And then when one looks at the situation with the SUNY hospitals, where in the case of downstate, it was a COVID-only hospital declared by the governor, but given no resources to accomplish this mission. Our members did accomplish the mission, protecting the rest of us from COVID. Many of them got sick, many of them died in the work that they did. At the same time, no resources were put in to sustain them. Indeed, in this year's budget proposed by Governor Hochul, there was no injection of public funding into the SUNY hospitals. This must end. If we are to have a just society, if we are to have access to health care, if we are to have the growing numbers of healthcare professionals we desperately need, there has to be the investment this year. The resources are there. The times demand it. And if it's going to happen, it must now, before the situation grows worse in our upstate communities and in the areas served by the SUNY hospitals. The time is now. It's urgent. Let's get the job done. And that is the challenge facing the New York State Legislature and the governor. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. At this time, I would like to invite up Assemblymember Jonathan Rivera. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'll be brief, but I want to first thank everybody for bringing all of us together and making this issue consistently an issue that needs to be in front of every member of the Senate and Assembly. I also want to thank Assemblymember Reyes, who has tirelessly fought for these issues, predating my time here certainly, and bringing things to the forefront that need to be there. So, I would say, first, there is a history in the New York State Assembly of believing, financing, investing, supporting public education at all levels. And truly constituent we deal with, and every person and every neighborhood and every entity that we interact with, is that it cannot move forward. We cannot move forward unless public education is funded appropriately. Whether it is the doctor that you see in your visit, the attorney that you need to close your home, to everyone and anyone in between, you need people that are educated. And in New York, we're going to educate people better than in any other state in this country. We believe in it. We're going to invest in it. And what we're able to do in this year's budget is just the beginning. We believe that we're going to do more. And there is no stopping to this. We have to continue to make this affordable and quality education. So thank you again for bringing us all here together. And I'd like to turn it over to Assemblymember Reyes.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us to uplift this very important issue. And my colleague said it so well, the importance of a strong higher education system, a public higher education system in our state. And the reality is that if we're going to address every issue that society is facing, that our state is facing, whether it be fiscal, whether it be the environment, whether it be healthcare disparities, whether it be educating our children, it all starts with a good public higher education. All of those people that we're going to depend on in the future are going to be educated at SUNY and CUNY, and we need to put the resources in place so that that can happen, because we will have no future without educating our population. And this has been such an incredible fight, an incredible coalition, and I say this all the time. It is one of the issues that I've worked on that hasn't seen any opposition. It's really about the moral will to decide what our priorities are and what we're going to do with the money that we have. But this is an issue that touches everybody, that everybody supports. Nobody can argue with the importance of an education. Nobody can argue with that. We are depending on our public higher educations to do something for us that nothing else can do. And that's making sure that we have a future where people can meet the challenges that we're going to be facing. So for me, this is a fight that is very personal, because I am a product of public higher education, as is my mother, as is so many people in my community, and so many people that I look up to have graduated from CUNY and SUNY. And we want to continue that legacy for all the students that are coming behind us. And for the faculty that does this work and does this work with love, they deserve to be compensated accordingly. They deserve to have the resources to provide the services that they know students need in order to be successful. We have done amazing work in this budget, but there's more to be done. Our One House priority has allocated almost an additional $500 million to SUNY and CUNY. To CUNY, and I think a little bit more to SUNY. But now we have to fight to make sure that stays that way. And if we can fight for a little bit more, we're absolutely going to do that, because the goal is still to make sure that we have a free CUNY for those students that want to get there. Thank you, everyone.
That's right. Thank you so much to both of our assembly members. At this point, I'd like to invite up Abdoullah Goudiavby, who's with us as a student from the University of Albany, where he is the Student Association President. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. My name is Abdoullah Goudiavby. I'm currently my senior year at the University of Albany, pursuing a Bachelor's of Science in Public Policy with a minor in Political Science. I also have the privilege of serving as the president of the UAlbany Student Association. I'm excited to be here today to speak on how important public higher education is and how life-changing a SUNY education is. Growing up as a Black low-income youth in the Bronx, I was familiar with what life was like when communities and people are not invested into. Normal to us was living without consistent heat in my household, neglect of my neighborhood infrastructure, and poorly funded schools that were kept afloat by dedicated teachers and community organizations. Being disregarded as second class was normal for me and so many that I grew up with. Seeing my mother juggle bills, inaccessible public assistance, and back-breaking jobs to give her children the best chance at life that she could was angering. I couldn't process how someone who was working so hard for multiple children could be dealt the worst cards imaginable. Despite the odds, my parents made their way to America from West Africa in hopes of creating a chance at life for my siblings and I that was unavailable at home. I navigated life through the public school system, knowing that I wanted and needed the opportunity to do better for myself, for my family, and my community. This opportunity that was needed was a college degree, an opportunity that SUNY provides to tens of thousands of New Yorkers every year. Like many who come to New York, I'm the child of immigrants. My twin sister and I are first-generation students, the first in our families to attend college. SUNY provides an affordable, away-from-home college option and experience. It provides space for a challenging academic environment with peers from varying backgrounds and walks of life. SUNY is the place where upstate meets downstate, where a kid from the Bronx and a kid from Buffalo can be introduced to new perspectives and new social circles that will be unavailable at home. It is also helping me navigate tough scenarios that are mirrored in the professional world and at-large society while building independence and life skills. Public higher education should be free to those who need it and accessible to every New York student. To get us there, we need increased funding. If New York State is going to continue to be a place that welcomes and invites immigrants to our communities with the promise of opportunity, we must fully fund SUNY and CUNY. Because opportunity without support is a false promise. Funding that allows for student resources like healthcare, mental health, diverse faculty, and more academic advisement will reap benefits for generations to come. This week, the Senate and Assembly released their budget proposals that outlines real progress for SUNY and CUNY. For New York to continue to be that destination of those seeking a better life, Governor Hochul and the state legislature must invest in those resources now, not in 5 years. After years of either cuts or no increases in support, we can seize this moment and restore opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdoullah. And I'll invite up now Alex Pellitteri, a student at CUNY Hunter.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm a student at Hunter College and part of the CUNY system in Manhattan and a member of the Young Democratic Socialist of America. And I'm here today on behalf of my classmates, my professors, and CUNY staff in support of a new deal for CUNY. CUNY was free up until the 1970s. Back then, anyone who wanted it could get a free and quality education. But during the fiscal crisis, that public entity was taken from us. Now, each state legislator has the opportunity to return this essential service to every single New Yorker. With so many millionaires and billionaires, and quite frankly, so much money in New York State, it's not a question of whether we can afford to fully fund higher education. It's a question of whether we are willing to spend the money. For me, a new deal for CUNY would mean that in-state students don't have to pay tuition. It would mean we would no longer need to delay taking classes because we cannot afford it. It would mean students do not need to work full-time and go to school full-time. And it means that we don't have to be constantly stressed about maintaining scholarships that allow us to attend school. It would ultimately mean that students can devote all their time and energy to just that, being students. A new deal for CUNY would mean that we can hire more full-time professors and that adjunct professors make a living wage. I have had professors who care deeply about their students and are passionate about the subject matter, but because they have to work multiple jobs to survive, and because we are in overcrowded classrooms, they cannot devote the individual attention to each student. But despite that, they find a way to go above and beyond for their students and are often not properly compensated for their labor. A new deal for CUNY would not only mean that they are paid a living wage, but that students can learn in an environment that works best for them. It would mean that we would have an adequate number of mental health counselors and academic advisors. There is currently one mental health counselor for every 2,700 CUNY students, one counselor for every 2,700 students. During a time of COVID, where we all experienced mental health effects, where many students felt stress and anxiety and needed to talk to somebody, many of them were simply unable to get an appointment. Finally, it would mean that we would be able to go to school in a livable campus. At my campus at Hunter, students are often late to class because the elevators don't work. Student classrooms are overcrowded with unpredictable temperatures. Quiet places to study are rare commodities, and ceilings are often caving in with exposed wires. At the dorms at Brookdale, students have unwelcomed roommates of vermin and bugs and mold in the bathrooms and kitchens. CUNY is the best public university system in the entire country, and I think that we need a new deal for CUNY to make sure that our campuses reflect that. CUNY students are this state's future. We are the next generation of nurses, teachers, engineers, and even state legislators. And we have the ability to transform New York, but we are currently in a broken system that makes it incredibly difficult for us to succeed. Ensuring that the $500 million currently in the one-house budget is in the final budget on April 1st would be the first step in making sure that CUNY is a free, fully funded, and accessible institution for all. And eliminating tuition is the most urgent issue that will help all CUNY students, and making sure that we have tuition decreases in the final budget would be the first step in achieving this goal. Passing the New Deal for CUNY will not just help every student, faculty, and staff member at CUNY, but it will invigorate New York's working class for generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. We have one more speaker, and I'm going to turn it over now to Reverend Joe Paparone.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Reverend Joe Paparone. I'm the lead organizer with the Labor Religion Coalition. My father, who passed away last year, also was a professor of theater at the State University at New Paltz for 43 years, a member of UUP. And so for my entire life, I've had a front row seat to both the benefits and the attacks on public higher education. I grew up in a town that had a flourishing arts community that was rooted in the theater and arts programs at the State University of New Paltz. That kind of community simply could not exist if the investments in higher education decades past hadn't occurred. One of the things I also, though, got to witness was death by 1,000 cuts on the trends that have been identified by other speakers here and what has been exacerbated by both the Great Recession and the COVID pandemic. And it is not a surprise that the most reactionary elements of our society target higher education. There are things that the elimination and the struggles of higher education lead to in our society that are harmful for all of us. It leads to less democratic participation, less abilities for the full flourishing of humanity in every field and area. And so this investment, this opportunity that exists coming out of the pandemic is once in a lifetime, hopefully for us. But it is true historically that in moments of crisis in this country, one of the ways that our society has been able to emerge and manage and come out sometimes stronger from crisis is through a massive investment in human and physical infrastructure, and particularly in public education. It occurred in the New Deal. It occurred in those brief moments of Reconstruction. And we have this opportunity to continue it today. Fully fund SUNY and CUNY for all people in New York State, and to be the to lead the way for every state in this country to fully fund higher education. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you so much.